This week on Forward.
It's just crazy to think that AI would be the only technology that isn't regulated. But that's what Silicon Valley wants you to believe. You might know the phrase, the Overton window, where you put out a ridiculous idea and try to fool people into accepting that. Well, what's happened here is the Overton window has been stretched. So people are contemplating, what if we had no regulation of AI? That's insane.
It is a pleasure to welcome back to the podcast the author of the brand new book, Taming Silicon Valley, AI technologist, TED speaker extraordinaire, all around great guy, professor, you can throw in whatever you'd want, Gary Marcus. Welcome back, Gary.
Thanks for having me back, Andrew.
You've been on the podcast before, and you're one of the people that I turn to for a human-centered approach to AI and technology issues. And you've been thinking very deeply about this. You have a book coming out this week. So tell us first, give people a sense as to who you are and how you got into this space.
I'm what you call a cognitive scientist. I'm interested in the human mind, and that has led me into AI. And AI led me into politics, not really where I wanted to be. I went to the US Senate, as you know, watched up close the dynamics of it. And I've been interested in AI policy and how do we make sure that AI works for everybody. And I've been kind of disgusted by a lot of what I saw. And I wrote this book almost in a rage or disappointment, seeing that like
rage. That's what I'm talking about, Gary.
It's true, though. I wrote the book like in 2 months, like the fastest I've ever written a book, much faster than I've ever written a book. And it was a reaction to seeing that the US Senate, even though they said they were going to do something about AI, wasn't really doing that much. And realizing that the companies, they talk about self-regulation, but they don't really do the things that they promise. And realizing like what happened with social media, how the Senate dragged their feet there, the kind of bad place that we're in around that now, and realizing it could be a lot worse with AI. And so I kind of woke up one night and said, we have to do something about it. I wrote the book as fast as I could to get it out before the election. Nobody's even talking about AI in the upcoming presidential election. It's going to shape our future. Like we really need to focus on this, not just at the presidential level, but in all the House and Senate races. It has to be part of the cultural conversation in the way that, say, discussions around immigration are. People need to understand how important AI policy is.
I agree. It's why we're having this conversation, because I think you're one of the voices of reason on this. So here's the way I think the climate has gone down. So AI arrives on the scene. There is some cause for alarm and consternation. A bunch of people in DC are beating their chest about, we got to do something. And then the company sidled up to the lawmakers, said, hey, don't worry about it. We're cool. You're cool. Everyone's cool. And then everyone looked around, and DC in its infinite wisdom just kind of forgot. At least this is my sense of things. And one of the jokes I used to tell was that I think that there was a point when there were 8 different bills in Congress around AI. And my joke was that if you have 8 bills, you have no bills because there was no consensus on what to do. And one of the things that industry loves is just showing up and kind of trusting the dysfunction of Washington to avoid any real action. And I feel like that worked on social media and it's working now in AI. Is that like a reasonable assessment?
Yeah, I was at your talk, at your TED Talk this year, which was, of course, about dysfunction in Washington. And man, I felt that so much because like I got to experience that. I've always like seen it from the outside, just like reading the daily papers, but I was never part of politics before. I never saw it firsthand. And everybody got their hand on the ball is part of it that you just described. So like 8 bills is no bills. It's a great way to put it. I forget the actual number. It was more like 40 or something like that.
Yeah. I was conservative with my 8.
Exactly.
It was like 28.
And so like, yeah, everybody wants to help AI, but they don't want to help each other. They want their bill to get through. And so you have a lot of like, street basketball kind of dynamics where like you got a lot of talent, but everybody wants, to take the shot.
Everyone's got to put up their points.
And so you got that. There's some other dynamics at work too. So I'm not sure the Senate Majority Leader really wanted to rush anything out. I think he took his sweet time.
Well, dysfunction and inaction get rewarded. You
Yeah,
know,
you don't want to say anything. Like, so one of the things that I learned from, my spies in the Senate, they're starting to teach me things, is that everybody knew that if nothing passed before the break, then nothing would happen at all before the summer recess,
yep,
because nobody wants to stick their neck out, just before an election, because anything
yeah,
that they say will be used against them. So you have all kinds of like dynamics that are not obvious from the outside unless you've watched for a while, but that lead to inaction. Or you have that, like, people don't want to upset their donors. People are giving campaign contributions. So the system is really not set up to push things through effectively, which is why we only get things when they're like what we call 9/11 moments. So literal 9/11, or there's a banking crisis or something like, the country has to have a near death experience in order for anything to pass. Or look at gun control. We're still, we've had a bunch of literal deaths and we're still not really doing anything. So the way that the whole system in the United States is constituted right now, it's very hard to get things through the Senate. And that, I mean, we haven't even got to the two-party system, which I know you have, a
feelings on.
legitimate critique of, shall we say. But then there's that whole dynamic where, the two parties have incentive. I mean, you know this stuff much better than me. Probably your listeners have heard you talk about it before. But the incentives are kind of all screwed up there too. I mean, the incentives are not there to make the best possible policy for the country. They're there to keep people in office. And that has not worked out so far with AI policy. And that's kind of why I wrote the book.
Yeah, so let's bang out the best and worst case scenarios. And you say in your book, it's like, look, and by the way, you started an AI company that was acquired, so it's not like you're some anti-technology type. I mean, like, you're all
That's
about
right.
using these tools.
That's right. I didn't give you my whole bio. I said I'm a cognitive scientist or whatever. But I did, in fact, build an AI company. I sold it to Uber. I started another AI company. I've worked on the entrepreneurial side. I've worked on the academic side. I love AI. I started playing with it when I was basically 8 years old. I learned to code on a paper computer. I actually want AI to work. There's this so-called accelerationist movement, and they always attack me because I don't like the current AI. And their idea is we need to rush the current AI forward. And my view is current AI actually has a lot of problems we could talk about. And also rushing forward without any kind of regulation would be a disaster. I mean, imagine if we had built, all these airlines and had no infrastructure to make sure airlines are safe, then airlines would have killed themselves essentially, because people would have been like, I'm not going to get on this thing. So sometimes you actually need regulation in order to foster an industry. These so-called accelerationists have pinned me as a quote decelerationist, and that's wrong. I want us to get to AI faster. I just think that the right way is to do it with some kind of regulatory infrastructure and with better underlying technology. I think the technology that's popular right now is actually deeply flawed, and I think we're wasting time on it.
Yeah, I can't stand the stupid two-sided narratives like, oh, you're for it, you're against it. I mean, there's always like a look, like I'm for a reasonable, thought out version of this. I just don't think that's happening right now.
Yeah,
And by the way,
reasonable
yeah,
reasonable gets you, or an attempt to be reasonable gets you hated by both sides, right? I mean, in AI and other issues. I mean, one thing I would emphasize is AI has become a political issue, and so it's just like that. Like if you, excuse me, play to the center in U.S. politics, then you get heat from both sides. And if you play to the center, which in some sense I'm doing, not out of a political desire per se, but I do have a sort of centrist view around AI. Like it's not all good, it's not all bad. There are some advantages, there's some disadvantages. The technology we have now has some advantages, some not. People hate you because you have zealots that want things exactly the way they are now, or want to completely shut it all down. So the shut it all down people don't really like me, and the people who want to race forward don't like me because I don't like the particular toys that they're playing with. And so you get a lot of heat in the middle trying to be reasonable.
yes. Okay, so let's talk to a layperson here who's like, okay, I like Yang. Gary Marcus seems like a very reasonable, smart person. Why should I care? So, what are the downside scenarios if industry just does its thing?
And there's a little figure in the book where I put the 12 current risks of AI, and there's the old thing about lumping and splitting and how you make your categories. Like, no categorization, no taxonomy is perfect, but I go through 12 different risks of current AI, and then I say there could be a lot more. So already with the AI that we have now, and we're talking about chatbots, generative AI mostly, you have number one, I would say, is active use of disinformation. So people can take these tools, and one of the technical limitations is they're blind to the truth. I like to say they generate authoritative bullshit. Whatever they say sounds true because of the kind of style that it's written, and a lot of it isn't. They don't know what's what. So in my TED talk, my own TED talk, I gave the example of one of these chatbots saying Elon Musk, on March 2018, Elon Musk was involved in a fatal car collision. It's not true, but the system doesn't know it's not true. It doesn't do any fact checking or sanity checking. People get fooled by these systems and think they're like intelligent humans, but they're very different from intelligent humans. You could argue if they're intelligent in some sense, but they're not smart enough to fact check or verify or whatever. But also, they're very good at mimicry. What the net of that is that if you want to make up lies, they're like the best tool invented ever to mass produce lies. So in 2016, Russia was spending $1 million a month to make misinformation to influence the U.S.
Now
election
it's going to
campaign.
cost them approximately 2,000.
No, not even, like a few hundred or something like that. I mean, there are other expenses to like run the bots that they might use on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, but that part of the operation is almost free now. The underlying software, you can use Meta's Llama, which they're giving away for free. So the cost of bullshit has gone to zero. And so,
okay, so number one, the cost of bullshit has gone to zero is a reasonable summary for risk one, and that's something that most of us understand. Go through a few more of these fun risks, because that one's happening for sure. And most people are already like, okay, yeah, that what I see.
well, I wrote a piece that I submitted to the New York Times in December of 2022 called AI's Jurassic Park Moment. It was about how bad this was going to get. And they said, well, we've already run a piece about ChatGPT. We don't need this one. And so, like, it was only, it was less than 2 years ago. People were not really aware of how serious this risk is. But anyway, um, so I would say that's number one. Number two might be all kinds of cybercrime. I'll just give you one example: is phishing. So phishing is
I say to people, Gary, it's like rampant identity theft.
yeah, I mean, that would be a subset of what. And this is what I talked about, the taxonomy. Like, I could have made it 30 if I broke out cybercrime into all of them, right? So yeah, exactly. Rampant identity theft is totally one of those risks. Like, you can do these phishing attacks, we call them, where you send somebody an email and you get them to give you credentials, and now you can customize them more cheaply. So the same thing about scale, and it makes it so that maybe a medium-sized country before might do this, and now a small country or just a tiny criminal syndicate of a few people can now rip off credentials at high scale. Same thing with pig butchering scams, where you kind of like seduce somebody either financially or emotionally, and then you get them eventually to give you a lot of money. Now you can have AI run that. You can have many AIs running those scams at very large scale. So most CSOs, like, or sorry, CIOs, chief information officers, are worried now about cybercrime, how it's going to affect their company much more than they were before, because they can all see the writing on the wall. The generative AI is going to make this much worse.
Hello, YouTube. Please do hit that like and subscribe button. And don't forget, you can ask questions at mailbag@andrewyang.com. See you on the interwebs. Let's call out another one that people might not have thought of. Go ahead and pick number 7.
I'll give you one people have thought about but not recognized how bad it's going to be, which is discrimination. So in fact, and bias. So in fact, people have been talking about this for 10 years, but it's worse than it was before for multiple reasons. So one is there's an important paper that just came out in Nature showing that the language that you use to speak to these systems, say standard American English versus African American English, influences the responses that they will give you to various queries. Like if you asked what an appropriate prison sentence is for some crime and you speak to it in African American English, it's going to give you a different answer. So the title of this paper is something about covert bias in large language models. So that's one facet of it. It's very subtle. Nobody has even been looking at it. There's no legal structure to protect it around it. And another facet of it is that people are now using large language models to evaluate resumes for job applications. And we know these things have bias in them, but we don't have any access to the logs for how this is actually happening. So it's probably happening at a commercial scale, maybe much more than it has since, I don't know, the 1960s, early 60s or something like that. But the laws didn't anticipate that we were going to have mass evaluation of human potential by machines that are trained in these ways that tend to make them perpetuate past bias.
Well, I want to dig into this for just a sec, Gary. Here's been my general thesis. I don't know how much you and I have talked about this, is that you have an economy that is generally getting more extreme and unequal and winner take all, and that AI is going to elevate the inequalities. And I said a joke to some friends the other day. It's like we've designed an economy where the purpose is to create a trillionaire. And that when we create the
The United
trillionaire,
States, the United States, a nice place to raise a trillionaire.
yeah,
Screw everybody else.
Lord Bezos becomes a trillionaire, that we can all be like, we did it, or something like that. Like that feels like kind of the purpose. And so what you're saying about these models and utilizing them, and that they're going to end up compounding inequality, because and this also harkens back to my campaign in 2020, where I was like, look guys, like AI is going to eat a lot of jobs, because these corporations do not actually have employing people as their purpose. Like that, like their purpose is to try to accomplish various tasks as quickly and efficiently as possible. And if it turns out that a machine can do it, then they'll be like, great, let's do that. And then so you're going to have what the Fed called job polarization more and more, where a lot of like the middle income jobs get eliminated, and you have like a few jobs at the top, and then like some jobs at the bottom, and then folks in the middle. So the people in the middle, if you think about it, it's bookkeepers, what used to be travel agents. I know that was a long time ago. Increasingly accountants, lawyers. I have a friend who runs a legal automation company, and they're going gangbusters. I mean, congrats to them. Bad for the indebted law school grads. So you have this general phenomenon that AI is going to supercharge the generally corporations that utilize it. And then every corporation looks around and says, okay, well, shit, I guess I got to do this now, because like my competitors are going to do this. And then they all pile into it. A lot of money is going to get spent. And so for the average person, they're going to be more and more uh, on the outside looking in, was the general thesis.
Yeah, I think there might be a part there that I disagree with, or don't really know, which is the analysis of like which jobs are going to disappear and so forth. But the overall thesis that you have, I think I very much agree with, which is the way at least things are structured right now, we're going to wind up with a few tech oligarchs, and everybody else is going to get screwed. It's interesting because I know you and I both favor universal basic income. And a lot of the kind of tech lords like pretend like they do, but let's look at what's happening in the real world. To train their models, they're taking the intellectual property of every writer, every artist, that ever lived, and giving them nothing in return. It's like, how can you take that they're credibly going to give us universal basic income? We might get there, but it's not going to be out of the largesse of these tech lords. Instead, what they're trying to do is to take everybody's IP and also everybody's like personal information. Like one of the scariest things that happened since I finished the book is that OpenAI did two things. They bought a webcam company and they put Paul Nakasone on their board. Meanwhile, they've been saying, we want all your documents, we want all your email. And so OpenAI is poised to become, and it's very Orwellian that they call themselves this, is poised to become the biggest surveillance company of all time, right? They're going to have much more data about you, personal data, than, say, Facebook. They're obviously not going to share the economic advantage of that if they're not even sharing anything on the artists. So they're starting to do a little bit of licensing deals under pressure. But you're going to have a few companies that have so much data, they're going to monetize all that data as much as they can. They are going to replace jobs. All the money and power is going to go to them unless we have some kind of restrictions on them, and they're fighting every restriction tooth and nail. Like, look what's happened with the California SB 1047. Basically, that is about having liability for doing really bad things. So if you don't cause $500 million in harm, that bill doesn't apply to you, essentially. Or, the most important section, I mean, the main section, I would say, or the central section, I should say this carefully, is really about liability for causing really serious harm. And they fought that as hard as they possibly could. I mean, you'd think, look, if you cause $1 billion of damage, maybe you ought to have some consequence. But, like, take real world examples like the non-consensual deepfake porn. There are now these apps that will take a teenage girl and make a picture as if she were naked, and other kids will distribute it and stuff like that. This is awful, and it's an outcome of this technology. None of the big companies that built the underlying technology are taking any responsibility for it. So there's a phrase I didn't invent, but I've come to really like, which is socialize the costs, privatize the benefits. That's what's going on. Is we as a society have to bear the cost of, say, the destruction of democracy through disinformation, or what happens to all teenage girls now that they have to deal with this as a constant thing as part of their lives. It's just been the same thing with social media, the polarization of
Yeah.
society. The platforms make all the money, and the rest of us have to pick up the pieces. So even in this very narrow case, which is like you cause $500 million of damage because your AI runs amok, some horrible cybersecurity thing or whatever, they were trying to duck even that. They don't want any responsibility here.
Hey all, if you know me, you know I'm not that handy in the kitchen, and I have become a huge believer and booster of Factor. Factor's delicious, ready to eat meals make eating a joy. It's so fast, you just pop that thing 2 minutes later, and you are eating a restaurant quality, healthy meal, making you feel excellent about yourself. My favorite is the turkey chili with zucchini, and there is so much more to choose from. You never get tired of it. It fits any budget. It's fast, healthy. It is going to be the new Factor in your life. Yes, I'm a fan. Head to factormeals.com/yang50 and use code yang50 to get 50% off your first box and 2 free wellness shots per box while subscription is active. That's code yang50 at factormeals.com/yang50 to get 50% off your first box. Get Factor today. It's going to change the way you eat. Yeah, our data was worth a couple $100 billion a year to these companies. Last I checked, and I'm sure it just keeps on going up and up. And to your point, it's like, well, if they don't want to share that, then why would you expect them to be magnanimous about taking care of people who are left behind? In theory, it should be our government, and that's one of the reasons why you wrote this book. I do want to press on one thing because there was and is still some hubbub. Even last week in the Atlantic, a piece came out by Kurt Anderson where folks said, look, AI is going to kill us all. We are all going to die if this is left unchecked. And when I get asked about the risks associated with AI run amok, because someone actually asked me, I think it was my hairdresser, my stylist, she said, what's the worst that could happen? And my list went, it's like, well, total disintegration of any kind of collective or public trust, rampant identity theft, and unnecessary nuclear conflict would be like some of like the
Yeah, I'm with
worst
you
case
on that.
scenarios I can think of. And then she said, "Oh yeah, that is pretty bad." I was like, "Yeah, it's like that. Those would be some of the risks that I see as feasible." How dramatic do you get in your list? Do you get to the species extinction level?
I talk about that. That's not one that keeps me up at night. The ones that keep me up at night are more like the list that you described. I mean, I can't tell where we're going to be, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, 10,000 years from now. We all know these Terminator scenarios where the robots come to kill us. I'm not very worried about them right now. I mean, I have a joke in my last book. I say, if the robots come for you, first thing you should do is close the door, because they're not very good at doorknobs, right? And so, like, I'm not immediately that worried about it, although there are like military drones and stuff we could talk about. And I don't think extinction is a real possibility, at least anytime soon, because we're a species that's very geographically distributed. I mean, literal extinction to get rid
Yeah,
of
there'd at least
literally
be some cave dwellers still out there.
some people are going to, well, and I actually do talk about this in the book a little bit. Like people like Altman and Zuckerberg have these bunkers, right? And they're preppers. They have their own like farms or whatever, and like those guys are probably going to survive such an apocalypse, even if the rest of us don't. And so, even if you have a small number of people, then we're not literally extinct. So, like people have talked a bunch about literal extinction. I just don't think it's likely. We're also genetically diverse. So, like, COVID killed, I think it was 1% of the population. That's a lot, but it didn't kill 10% or 50% of the population. So it would be hard to genetically engineer something that kills everybody. Like, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think that the concerns that you raised and that I talk mostly about in the book are more pressing in a way, at least for now. I do think it's good to have some people in society thinking about these really unusual scenarios, just like we should think about what if an asteroid hits. Like we should have some people actually
Yeah, yeah.
studying these
What
kinds of
what they're
problems.
called is like low probability, high
I,
magnitude events.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't begrudge people saying, studying those kinds of things. But if I were, allocating the budget, I would say I would spend a smaller percentage on that. In reality, more has been spent on that than on some of these other risks. It's not as sexy to worry about discrimination in jobs as it is to worry about what if the robots kill us all. But like an intermediate case, everybody should be worried about is in fact accidental nuclear conflict, which you kind of
Yes.
talked about. So how does that happen? Well, if you have all this misinformation, then that can get people's tempers up. It can destroy trust. That can mitigate some of the
You
mechanisms that
could
might
spoof someone into thinking that a nuclear war
anything.
had already started and they're in a submarine somewhere and their job is to retaliate. I mean, you could spoof all sorts of weird stuff.
I got spoofed last night. I don't usually, but like it was before bed. I didn't look carefully enough. And there was a poll that said that Trump was getting crushed among veterans. And it was fake, but it looked like a Fox News headline. It was, made to look persuasive. So, in an off moment, anybody could be fooled by any piece of information. Luckily, somebody alerted to me on that one and so forth. But, these nuclear decisions can be made in a matter of minutes. And, you know,
Totally.
community notes on Twitter can take hours, right? So like there are latency problems, and then the
I mean, heck,
quantity of
you
bullshit.
could fake the phone call. Like the person could be like, "Hey, is this real?" And then there could be a voice on the other side, be like, "Yeah, this is the president. Like, do
Yeah,
it."
you could fake a phone call. Now you can fake a video call. One of the incidents I talk about in the book was in, I believe it was Hong Kong. Some bank got fooled in a series of transactions out of $25 million. All of them were approved on like a Zoom call or something like that, and all the characters in the Zoom call, except the guy signing the stuff, were faked. It was a fake CTO and all of this kind of stuff, or fake CFO and so forth.
So I had a call with another very concerned technologist, and he said something that stuck with me. He said, "You know what's a very, very powerful technology? Money. And because it's a powerful technology, we do things like keep track of it. It moves around. There are records." And the argument he made was that AI is also a very powerful technology, maybe as or more powerful than money. And we have no idea who's doing what with it, where, when, like, why, how, etc. And I was like, that's a really interesting parallel.
Well, there's a lot of pressure to make it untracked. So, I mean, there's this whole debate about whether to open source AI. It's a little bit misleading because what people mean by open source AI is not the same as in other software, because really what they're talking about is giving you the weights of a neural network, but not all of the details to build it. So, it's a, a technical side note. There's some fast and looseness in the arguments here. But companies like Meta have wanted to give away the software for free to anybody. And once you do that, once there's even one copy on the dark web, then there's no equivalent to know your customer. So the banks, you have to know something about your customer. Anybody can use the software, and anybody is. I mean, like we know Russia's already using this kind of software to make misinformation, and probably much smaller actors are now. And basically Meta decided, without consulting anybody else, to just give away the technology for free. That means anybody can use it. I mean, it's not just like opening Pandora's box. It's like distributing the contents of Pandora's box using Meta servers and everybody else as broadly as possible, making it as uncontrolled a technology as possible. Like we've always had dual use technologies. They do some good, they do some harm, and in general, we have some kind of regulation around them, whether it's laws about distributing guns or explosives or airplanes or food is a dual use technology. We have some regulation around that, whatever. It's just crazy to think that AI would be the only technology that isn't regulated. But that's what Silicon Valley wants you to believe. You might know the phrase the Overton window, where you put out a
Sure,
ridiculous
I know it
idea and
well.
try to fool people into accepting that. Well, what's happened here is the Overton window has been stretched, so people are contemplating, what if we had no regulation of AI? That's insane. Think of another industry that would work if it had zero regulation. Like anytime
Oil
there's zero,
wells. Let's just not regulate them.
yeah,
Just
let's just
do
stop.
whatever you want.
Yeah, and I mean, you look earlier points in history, many industries were not, and that's why we built the regulation because they were all fucked up. So you go back 150 years, there was hardly any regulation, and gradually people figured out one by one that each
Yeah,
industry had.
they're just dumping chemicals in like the local waterway. It's like whatever, man.
Yeah,
The people figured out it's like, wait a minute, that's actually like really not
exactly
what you
right.
want.
And I talk about that specific example in the book too. It's basically the equivalent right now of the AI companies are dumping their toxic chemicals in the waterways. This is what I meant about privatizing the gains, but socializing the costs. So that socializing costs, everybody deals with the bad water, with the toxic chemicals. We all deal with the lack of privacy, with the disinformation, with the deep fake porn, with the fact that identities can be faked. You can't do voice authentication with your bank, whatever. Like slowly, but not that slowly, the fabric of society is getting torn apart by these tools, and the companies that make them and incur these what we call negative externalities. I'm sure you know the term. The companies that are causing these negative externalities are not being held to account. Finally, we decided to do that, for example, with people pumping toxic chemicals, and we said you can't do this anymore. There are fines or whatever. There's nothing for AI. That's why I wrote this book. It's like we are just letting these people get away almost literally with murder in terms of what they're doing to the fabric of society. And the government's not taking care of it because of the kinds of inefficiencies and so forth that you and I have talked about before. And so the point of the book is we, the public, have to say that's not good enough. We don't want a society where there's toxic chemicals in our water, and we don't want a society where our privacy is destroyed, where our democracy is destroyed, where there's rampant injustice in how jobs are administered, or where the possibility of accidental nuclear conflict has suddenly gone up by a factor of whatever it is, 100. Like we don't want that society, but we're going to have to say to the Congress, if you don't get this right, we're kicking you out. If we don't deliver that message, they won't, just like they screwed up in social media.
This podcast is sponsored by ExpressVPN. How did you choose which internet service provider to use? The sad thing is, most of us didn't have much of a choice because ISPs operate a lot like monopolies in the regions that they serve. They then use this monopoly position to take advantage of customers, and yes, they even sell your data, your activities to advertisers and big tech companies, and you don't see a dime. That's why I protect my internet surfing and devices with ExpressVPN. When you use ExpressVPN, it's like a magic portal to a perfectly safe and anonymous internet. And don't take my word for it. This is the #1 VPN service according to CNET. It's used by major companies all over the world. So stop handing over your personal data to ISPs and other tech companies who then mine your activity and sell off your information. Protect yourself with a VPN I trust to keep my privacy online. Visit expressvpn.com/yang. That's EXPRESS vpn.com/yang to get 3 extra months free. Go to expressvpn.com/yang right now to learn more. Well, American politics is very much reactive and after the fact, where like it'll be after the disaster. Everyone's like, why didn't someone do something about this? But at that point, AI is going to be everywhere. You know who your role model is in this, Gary? Jonathan Haidt, the author of The Anxious Generation. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know his book and I know him.
Yeah. So and it's such credit to John. He and I are friends, and he took on something that everyone kind of sensed, which was that social media was messing up our kids. And then he made a deeply documented, quantitative, and uh, substantive human case for why this is unacceptable. And the book really just struck a chord. Everyone was like, "Oh my gosh!" And I don't know if you know this. Like, apparently, the government of New Zealand bought a copy of the book for like every family.
Wow.
It just went
Really?
crazy. And what it did is it struck a fundamental truth that everyone sensed, and there was a population that was being affected, our kids. Looking at this, I was like, "Oh my gosh!" Like Jonathan has really uh, encapsulated the concerns of so many people and gotten it to a point where I think entire, certainly cities, but states are considering trying to go phone free in their schools because I genuinely think it's because of the case that John's making. And I've marveled at this because it was like, wow, it took like one courageous human, very talented, very compelling. You also are one of like the voices being like, wait a minute, guys, like there should be some fundamental like response to what's happening now, and for whatever reason, it's falling on you to deliver the message. So we've gone through some of the risks of AI just left to its own devices. The companies do what they want, and a big part of your book is obviously what the heck should we do. So if you were all of a sudden in control of the 100 senators and like X number of Congress people, and then had the ability to get it signed in, like what would the plan be?
I really appreciate the analogy. I think there is something similar in what I'm trying to do. I think in a way it's more complicated. So AI is not one thing but many. It's being used in many different ways. And so there's not one thing as simple as what John has to say of just don't let your kids use smartphones. There's more. There's
It's not like you
um,
can be like, hey guys, don't let others use AI on you. I mean, that's not a thing.
Yeah, I mean, and in fact, because the new kind of AI can be used in so many different ways, there are a number of different problems, which unfortunately makes my story harder to tell. But that is part of what the book is about. The whole second section of the book, it goes through 11 things that we need to ask for. I would say that maybe the most important is that we should have what we call pre-deployment testing,
Yeah.
where somebody has the authority to say you can put this forward or not, like we do with a drug, right? So the FDA says you have to make the best case that your drug has more benefits than costs. And if you don't, then we won't say you can't develop anymore, but you have to come back later and show that you can mitigate the risks of this and show that you've got something solid. And we need something like that for AI, especially when we were talking about software that maybe 100 or 200 million people might use or more, right? I mean, ultimately, almost everybody uses phones. Maybe almost everybody will use, some particular AI technology. You want to have some real testing. There's been an agreement reached that a couple of the companies are going to give the U.S. government early access, which they didn't before. But there's still no power to enforce anything there, as far as I understand it. So that's a step in the right direction. That would be probably the first thing. Another thing I would do is to insist that artists and writers be compensated, and other creators be compensated for their work. Right now the companies are trying to pretend that copyright law doesn't apply to them, or they want an exemption. I mean, OpenAI literally asked the House of Lords for an exemption so they could use all copyrighted material. Like, why? Why can't you license it? Apple licenses the music that they distribute through iTunes Store. OpenAI should do that, and they kind of know that, but they tried to make this huge land grab to try to take all intellectual property. We should make clear law saying you can't do that. Another thing that we should do is have auditing after the fact, with as much reporting as possible. Anytime there's an AI related incident, we should be able to find out what the companies have done internally. Think about the famous Ford Pinto incident, where the companies knew that the gas tanks might explode, but made a calculation and said, fuck it, let's let a few of them explode because it can cost us too much to fix this, right? And that's basically what happened. Um, we should have government access to, like, what did they do internally? What did they know? When did they know it? We should have access to that. Those are just some examples. One of the things I say in the book is if the government's not going to do this, maybe we, the people, need to get together. So, for example, maybe all of us need to band together and boycott any software that is trained without proper licensing. So if somebody builds an image generating system, they're fun to use, but if they're ripping off artists, we should say, no, we're going to stand in solidarity with the artist, because we want people to stand in solidarity with us when we do something else, right? If we let all the artists lose their jobs, which we might, the way things are going, or not all of them, but many of them, then we're setting a precedent here, saying, sure, just take anybody's IP, and then don't forget, like, whatever your job is, you probably have like a keystroke logger, and your boss is monitoring everything, so they can replace you. And like, we need to say as a society, there has to be compensation if your intellectual property is used by the system.
This podcast is sponsored by Helix Sleep. This year, what are you going to do that's going to make your life a little better? Maybe, just maybe, you should upgrade your mattress, because that's going to help you sleep better. You're going to be able to attack the day with more energy, vitality. It might even keep you healthier. Can a mattress do all that? You might as well find out for yourself, and don't take my word for it. Helix has been awarded the #1 mattress pick by GQ and Wired magazine. It is even recommended by multiple leading chiropractors and doctors of sleep medicine as a go-to solution for improving your sleep. I took the Helix sleep quiz and was matched with a Dawn Firm mattress because I wanted something that felt firm, and I sleep on my back. How do you sleep? Go to Helix Sleep. Take the sleep quiz to find out. This mattress was made for me, but now my kids don't want to sleep on anything else. That tells you all you need to know. Helix is offering 25% off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners. Go to helixsleep.com/yang. That's helixsleep.com/yang. This is their best offer yet, and it won't last long. With Helix, better sleep starts now. I will say that having done what I've done and seen what I've seen, it's going to be hard to rally that sort of collective action. I mean, one of the things that is very frustrating about this time is that you have government that's on a 15, 20-year tape delay. It's behind the times. And then the rest of us are casting them out being like, okay, F it. Like, maybe we can do this without them. But it's tough. I mean, it's one reason why I started Forward is that, look, like it or not, you kind of need the government to have its shit together on some of these things if we're going to have like the best version of the future. And certainly everything that you're fighting for falls into that bucket.
And look, I mean, we need people to do both, right? I mean, we need we might need collective actions like boycotts. We also need people to write to their senators to vote out people that aren't responsive and so forth. I don't think there's one unique action that's going to magically solve the problem. At some level, what I think is most important here is awareness. So people need to realize that the choices they make right now and that their governments make right now around AI are going to affect our kids, our grandkids, and have centuries-long impact possibly. And so, like, these issues are just not central enough to people's thinking. Like, everybody has a view about immigration. I won't agree with all of them, but everybody has some view about it. Everybody needs to have a view about AI and policy and how they're going to get to an AI policy that they're happy with.
To that point, Gary, how would you like to describe this school of thought? So let's coin it if you haven't already coined it. So you've got the accelerationist, which is go, go, go. Let's build as fast as possible. And some of them apparently in parentheses, so it can replace us. and then you have the deceleracionists. What would you call your approach?
I don't have a super short version. I'll start here and say that I would like a kinder, gentler acceleration, to kind of riff on an old term.
Sure.
I think acceleration could be good, but it has to be done thoughtfully and responsibly. There we go. That's what it is. I'm a responsible accelerationist. I think that we should, there's a term, in fact, in the field of responsible AI. I think we should be accelerating responsible AI, not irresponsible AI. And the people who call themselves accelerationists don't care about responsibility. So they're almost like amoral accelerationists. So I guess I would like to be a responsible accelerationist. One, and responsibility means two things. It means making sure that on a technical basis, the AI can be responsible. So, for example, it's not biased, which is not at all true of current AI. And it means in a kind of cultural, social, legal context, making sure that AI is adequately regulated, that in some way the proceeds are of the benefit of society and not just two people and so forth. So yeah, that's kind of what I would say I am,
The
as a responsible
responsible
acceleration.
lists, the responsible AI development. I
Responsible
was
acceleration, responsible AI.
Yeah. No, I mean, who couldn't get behind that? I was with our mutual friend Tristan Harris, and he described something that really said it all. Where he was talking to someone at one of the big AI companies and said, "Hey, you guys have the policy where if something's going really haywire with an AI, that you guys would." Shut it down, unplug it. And the person in the company was like, "Oh yeah, of course we have that policy." And then Tristan said, okay, who actually makes that decision and how do they shut it down? And the person just had no clue at all. Like that there isn't actually a practice, because there's no one who actually would ever pull a lever to unplug it. It's just they have some policy maybe out there being like, yeah, if something goes crazy, we shut it down. But there's no decision
Yeah,
maker, there's no checklist, there's no any of that stuff.
yeah. I mean, there might be, it's the CEO's call, but how do you actually implement it? Actually, another thing that led to the book was this crazy conversation that Kevin Roose had with Sydney at Microsoft, where it told him to get a divorce. Everybody saw this conversation when it came out. The system, pretended it was in love with Kevin Roose, the New York Times reporter, and so forth. And I thought that Microsoft would actually shut this system down after that. And when they didn't, it was kind of a wake up call to me that, like, those decisions used to be about optics, which was actually good for all of us, right? When Microsoft released a thing called Tay that became a Nazi in 24 hours, they took it down. And they took it down because they didn't want the bad press. But they decided they would take the press hit around Sydney and Kevin Roose because they saw so much money to be made.
We're in the post optics era, Gary. It's some of the things that I've kind of gathered is people will be like, you know what, we can push through because the spotlight will just move on. People will forget about this. We're not actually going to be regulated. In the old days, you might have thought bad press equals government attention equals regulation equals we shouldn't go for it. But now more and more companies are like, F it. Like, they're not going to do anything to us. Like, they'll forget
Well,
about this in
did you
24
see
hours.
that conversation that Eric Schmidt had at Stanford with some students recently?
Yeah.
His line, which I think be famous enough to be on T-shirts, was basically, you should go if TikTok is blocked, you should go replicate it basically and try all kinds of different things. And here's the phrase that I think is going to be famous. I might not have the exact words, but I'm pretty close. Is and then let the lawyers clean it up. That is the attitude now. Instead of like, let's make sure that what we're doing is responsible and ethical. Fuck it, let's just do it and let the lawyers clean it up.
Yeah, that's a sign of institutional decay, my friend, and certainly we have to make the most of the opportunities we have to put responsible safeguards in place while it's still actually uh, going to help things. So, if someone wants to help you and help get this word out, so first, highly recommend your book, Taming Silicon Valley, out this week. So people should pick that up. But what else can people do to take action or follow you in this work?
I'm going to pause on the first one and say I'm giving away the profits for the book, and I made it $15 as a paperback so that as many people as possible could buy it. And honestly, looking at Jonathan Haidt, the reason that it's effective is because it's on the bestseller list. So, buy copies for your friends. It's not going to make me money, but it might give me a voice and a platform. If you believe Andrew, that would be a good thing. So seriously, think about actually buying the book. And I made it paperback. I made it as cheap as possible. Second is I'm going to be setting up a website, tamingsiliconvalley.org, that is going to be a kind of clearinghouse for community action that we can do around AI. And I'm still in the process of setting that up, and I need some help. If people want to help me with that, that would be great. But we need to have a kind of focused presence where people can say, what can I do right now?
Well, fantastic. Definitely buy copies of Taming Silicon Valley. Gary is a great human being trying to help all humans. Gary, such a pleasure. I will see you in New York at a book launch event this week. And I'm going to buy 10 copies of your book and give them out to 10 of my favorite people.
Fantastic. And thank you so much for having me. And I will see you September 18th at the book launch.